All right, let's talk about the Las Vegas Raiders. Been a very active team this entire offseason, making big moves, front office, coaching staff, big trades, big signings, re-signings to across the board. The Raiders have been in the news a lot with a lot of really solid strategic moves. But lost in the hustle and bustle of all these big names is underlying a really smart strategy that has continued with a recent move that happened over the weekend. We'll break that down in just 1 second. But first, I'm Nick, that's Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the Raiders have been making a lot of really good strategic moves, but people aren't really paying attention to what the Raiders are actually doing behind the scenes. But their most recent move, their most recent addition, is just another indication of the strategy Spytek and this Raiders leadership is implementing. Let's get into that report first, and then we'll talk about what the Raiders are doing on the other side. So let's pull up this tweet courtesy of Jordan Schultz at Schultz Report. He says, sources, the Raiders are signing veteran linebacker Devin White to a 1-year deal. Devin White, of course, was very famous for his stellar play at linebacker for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for a number of years. Raiders GM John Spytek drafted White in Tampa Bay and now reunites with him in Las Vegas, right? So this seemed like a decent enough move. The Raiders need some linebacker help. But what's going on here? What is the overall strategy with the Raiders? Well, the Raiders have been making a lot of moves this offseason predicated on one thing. We've hit on this channel about this a number of times. They're trying to get back to stability in terms of making playoff runs, making playoff appearances, and winning games. And when you look at their entire roster makeup now versus the end of 2024, there's a startling revelation. Let's go ahead and pull up our first graphic here. So this is the playoff starts on the roster at the end of 2024 for the Raiders and right now in 2025. So you can see the playoff starts at the end of 2024, a little bit more than 10, not a whole lot. Now nearly 30. They more than tripled the number of playoff starting experience on their team in just a matter of a few months. And we all know, of course, they've made moves in the front office. Tom Brady more active. He's the winner of winners. You look at Pete Carroll. He's made numerous playoff appearances. He's won a Super Bowl, of course, been to another one. This is a team leadership. Spytek, of course, with his playoff appearances as an executive prior to coming to the Raiders. This is a team, their entire moves, every single one of them, ownership group, front office, coaching staff, player acquisition has been about getting playoff experience, also paired with championship success. If we go into our next graphic here, you can go to the end of the year 2024. The Raiders had one Super Bowl ring on their roster by our count. Right now, they've got four. Obviously, this isn't counting Brady or Spytek or Carroll. This is specifically players. If you throw in those three guys, they obviously have a whole lot more now than they did according to the past regimes. What does this mean? It means the Raiders are collecting a lot of really good, solid, talented players. You could argue, is Devin White a step past his prime? You could argue how good some of these moves are on an individual basis. But when you look at the collective, it's clear and obvious the Raiders' strategy is to collect winners, is to collect champions, is to get this culture headed in the right direction. And it's a new approach, and it's a smart approach by the Raiders. They try to use a guy like Antonio Pierce, just through the force of his personality and his leadership traits, to kind of reshape the culture in Las Vegas. They try to do it similar when they brought John Green back for a second term. It didn't quite work out in either of those instances, obviously. Here, they're taking a different approach. Instead of trying to build it from the top down only, they're doing it from the top down with leadership, but they're also bringing in championship players too. You talk about resetting the culture, you talk about winning playoff games and getting to playoffs again. That's exactly what the Raiders are doing here. And every single move they've made this offseason, Geno Smith, Chin, the safety, Devin White, Carroll, Spytek, across the board, every single move has been predicated. Landon Roberts, another small, again, underrated move, lots of playoff experience, Super Bowl titles, right? Across the board, what the Raiders have done this season is add veterans with winning experience, playoff experience, and Super Bowl titles. And that's going to have a massive impact on this organization going forward. Mize, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, but Raider Nation, you guys first in the comment section below. Now that you've had a chance to kind of see the numbers here, talking about what the Raiders are doing, bringing in winners. What are your thoughts on the Raiders offseason in terms of who's the best winner they brought into the fold, right? Is it Pete Carroll as the head coach? Is it Spytek? We'll discount Brady because it's kind of an easy one. He's got all the rings. But is it Carroll, Spytek, right? Do you look at Geno Smith, what he's done the past few years? Landon Roberts, maybe it's White, whoever it is. Who's the new winner that the Raiders have added this offseason? Front office, player, coach, whoever, that you think will have the biggest impact on this team going forward? Put that guy in the comment section below. But Miles, I will throw it over to you now. What are your thoughts on this latest revelation involving the Raiders' plan here?
Yeah, Nick, I think this is a really interesting approach. And, on this channel, we like to talk about a lot of stuff, but we talk about smart moves, talk about analytics, breaking stuff down, obviously, by our love of graphs and things like that. But we also kind of allude to things in a business mindset thing and the culture of like business and corporate America from your perspective, my perspective of small business ownership. And what I see this team as is the ability for someone to come in and have championship experience, have been to Super Bowls, have won Super Bowls is almost more important than if they're just an average player on the field. I would rather have that guy sometimes than someone who's a little bit above average play on the field, but has never had that style of experience. When you bring someone into your organization who's like, well, you go in, you have a lot of young, hungry salesmen. You're like, all right, we got to close this $100 million deal. Well, they go, well, I've never done a deal that big before. I don't know what to do. They could be very talented. They could be very good at their job. They just don't have the experience. You come to a team like, let's say, lately the Carolina Panthers, Jeremy Chin, for example, from the Panthers, say, hey, we need to get ready to hit the playoffs. We got to have that playoff mindset. We got to get a Super Bowl mindset in mind. He's like, dude, I haven't even been to the playoffs before, much less had that mindset. I don't know what to do in that aspect. Now, a la Devin White, guys like that, bring him into the fold. Geno Smith's a winner, guy who's been in the playoffs multiple times. You come in, bring these new people into your organization, and they'll be like, hey, I've been there a bunch of times. I've won there. I've won a Super Bowl before. I know exactly what it's like. I think you can't discount what Spytek and Co. are doing here. It's just adding these veteran presences is going to have guys like Brock Bowers coming into the NFL where he has one view of how the team is run, but bringing in a different perspective with all of this, whole front sale change in the front office just be like, hey, these are winners. These are the guys that have been there. They know what's going on. They might not be like the top of the top players, but they know what it's like to win. They've been there before. Learn from their experiences. As great as Max Crosby has been and is, he's not the guy that you need to talk about going to win a Super Bowl because he's never been there. He's never done it before. I'm sure he's very capable of getting you there, but there's other guys, other experiences that you can lean on this team now. And I think this is a really underrated aspect the Raiders have gone after here. I love this approach, just really changing the culture in more ways than one. Not just adding talent to the team, but adding experience and adding guys who have been to where you want to be. I think is something that's very underrated when building a young franchise.
Yeah, one of the great team builders in NFL history, Bill Parcells. One thing he would do every time he leaped from team to team, which he did, of course, going to the Giants, Patriots, Jets, and then finally the Dallas Cowboys, and then helped do some work with the Miami Dolphins towards the end as kind of a front office role. He would always bring in what they call the Parcells guys, right? And there's the guys that were played with him before, coaches that he worked with before, to each one of the new stops. And one of the reasons he would do this is because he would say, I need guys that know how to win. And it sounds a little cliche, but it is very true. It's very hard to figure out how to win in terms of how do you handle yourself every single week? How do you handle the offseason? How do you handle adversity? What are the strategies you use? What's the mindset you take in and week out? It's one of the weird reasons why the NFL, they try to do all this parity, but it seems teams are always drafting the same teams are drafting the top 10 every year, and the same teams are drafting in the bottom 10 every year. You have the Jets, for example, have been terrible for so long. They've had good players, they've had different coaching staffs, they've changed general managers. Just some teams just don't know how to win. And it's not just about having talent. That's what's really important. There are a lot of really talented teams, especially if you look over the past, let's say, 5 years or so. Let's look at three teams specifically. How about the Packers? How about the Detroit Lions? How about the Dallas Cowboys? These are three teams. You'll throw the Pittsburgh Steelers in there too, that's out of fourth, that are loaded with talent. They've got a lot of experience. They've got good quality veterans. They got superstars, all pros, MVPs, but none of those teams can figure out how to make a deep playoff push. None of those teams can figure out how to win the big game. Why? It's because they have players that don't know how to win. The Lions were a terrible franchise for so long. Now they got some talent, but they can't figure out how to win the big game. They don't know how to do it. The Packers, since the Aaron Rodgers era has come to the end, same thing. They're all young and up and comers. They don't know how to win. The Cowboys, they've never signed anyone externally. They've been so internally focused for so long that the entire roster is full of some good players that have never won anything. And the same thing with the Steelers, right? They're so focused internally. They've got all these great players, a lot of, the TJ Watts of the world, of course, but they don't not full of guys that have that championship pedigree, those playoff wins. And what happens is you can be good, you can be talented, you can have good players, but you don't know how to win those big games and make them to the playoffs and then win those playoff games. And that's what Tom Brady, I think it starts with him. Spytek has fallen this course. In Pete Carroll, too, you got that, that triangle right there, that trinity right there. If those three guys at the top of the organization that understand what it takes to make it to the playoffs, to win playoff games and win championships. And that's the attitude they're setting. And if you look at all the moves they've made, it's certainly their big headlines. almost every single one of them is playoff experience. Even the smaller moves. Raheem Mostert went to a lot of playoff games, went to a Super Bowl. He started playoff games. Landon Roberts already mentioned, right? He's won Super Bowls with the Patriots. You look at Chin. He was in the NFC Championship game last year for Washington. And now, of course, you got Devin White, who I think has started like 10 playoff games, or he started a bunch of playoff games in his career during his time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is a roster that in the matter of a couple months has gone from a team that doesn't have players that know how to win to a team that has players literally at every position almost that know how to win. You look at quarterback, Geno Smith, they know how to win, right? You look at running back, know how to win. You look at levels of the defense, all three levels of the defense, guys that know how to win. Across the board, they now have guys that know what it takes week in and week out, every offseason, preseason, everything you have to do, right? Overcoming injuries, tough loss, how do you bounce back, working with the coaching staff. Everyone now in this roster has someone they can look to on both sides of the ball, coaching staff, front office, that has that critical experience. And it's one of those things that's really hard to quantify and really hard to measure, because everyone's all about how do we get better? How do we improve our roster and get just better on paper? But the reality is, and this is one of those so true things, it's the same thing in the business world and same thing in football world. And this is the key point. We always talk about you need better players to win, but maybe it's the other way around. Maybe players who win are better. And that's the approach the Raiders are taking. They're sitting there saying, well, there may be a player that grades better on PFF than Raheem Mostert, but then why doesn't he win, right? There may be a player that looks better than Chin, or maybe Devin White didn't look good last year, but why does he win everywhere he's gone in his career, right? And this is sort of the Tom Brady model. There are quarterbacks that had better arms, that were faster, better athletes, but all Brady did was win and win tremendously. That's the approach the Raiders are taking. And I think having that inverted approach is the right mentality to take. And I think we're going to see big results this season and in the future, more importantly, because of it.